Hey there. Get ready for a deep dive into one of the most enduring mysteries in America, really, the Zodiac Killer. You've sent over a really fascinating collection of articles about this case, and we're going to dive deep today. Try to uncover, some of those chilling facts, try to make sense of those infamous ciphers.
What's fascinating about this case, and this is something I'm sure you've seen in your research, is how the Zodiac really used the media to craft this terrifying persona. It's a case study in fear and manipulation through media.
So, okay, picture this. It's the late 1960s, San Francisco Bay Area. A string of brutal murders has everyone on edge, but this isn't just a silent predator. The Zodiac wants notoriety, he craves an audience, and he's going to get it in the most unsettling way possible by reaching out directly through letters and ciphers.
And he knew exactly how to get attention, right? Newspapers became his platform, spreading these cryptic messages and fueling this climate of fear that really gripped the entire region.
So let's talk about those confirmed victims. It all starts on a December night in 1968 on Lake Herman Road. Young couple David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen found shot to death in their car. Classic Lover's Lane scenario turned nightmare. What I find so striking about this first attack is how it immediately sets the stage for the terror to come seemingly random, incredibly brazen, and just utterly chilling.
Yeah, and the brutality, as you know from the articles, continues just a few months later with the attack on Michael Mageau and Darlene Ferrin at Blue Rock Springs Park. This time there's a terrifying twist. Michael survives.
You won't believe this Mageau actually provided a description of the attacker, a detail that would become, very crucial to the investigation. But sadly, Darlene Ferrin did not survive the attack.
And the attack at Lake Berryessa on Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard, this is where we see the Zodiac's chilling theatricality really come into play. He approaches them in broad daylight, wearing this bizarre hooded costume with that now infamous Zodiac symbol on it.
It's like something straight out of a horror movie. He ties them up, claiming to be an escaped convict, and then launches into this vicious attack. And if that wasn't horrifying enough, he leaves a message on Hartnell's car door using, like, a felt-tip pen, the circle with the cross through it. That becomes his calling card.
But there's another detail of this case that I always found particularly chilling. The Zodiac, he actually made a phone call from a gas station confessing to the crimes while the operator's listening in disbelief. This very public declaration of his crimes just intensified this media frenzy that was surrounding the case.
And then there's the murder of Paul Stein, a San Francisco cab driver. This one puzzled investigators initially because, unlike the previous attacks, which took place in these kind of secluded areas, this happened in a busy city.
That's right. This one really demonstrates the Zodiac's boldness and his desire to keep everyone guessing. He wasn't bound by one single modus operandi, which made it nearly impossible to predict his next move.
And this is where it gets really interesting, and I know you're particularly drawn to this aspect of the case. The Zodiac's letters and ciphers. He taunted police, he taunted newspapers, sending these cryptic messages, demanding they be published, turning the media into this unwilling accomplice in his terrifying game.
And these ciphers were like nothing anyone had ever seen before.
Yeah.
They were complex, confounding. For a time, they were completely unbreakable. It was actually a couple from Salinas, Donald, and Betty Harden that finally cracked the code on one of those ciphers.
And what they uncovered sent shivers down everyone's spines. I like killing people because it is so much fun. It's this line that has become synonymous with the Zodiac case, really encapsulating the killer's chilling detachment and utter disregard for human life.
Yeah, it's like, here's where the fog of the Zodiac case, it just gets even thicker, right?
Yeah.
Because you were digging into these articles, I'm sure you noticed that those confirmed victims, they're just one part of the story. There's a number of other cases that might, and I emphasize might, be linked to the Zodiac.
It's like stepping into a maze with no way out. You start to see connections everywhere, but the evidence is oftentimes circumstantial, leaving you with more questions than answers. One of the names that always comes up in these discussions, Cherry Jo Bates.
Right, the murder of Cherry Jo Bates. She was a student at Riverside City College, killed in 1966, years before the Zodiac officially, sort of, surfaces in the Bay Area. And what's so eerie is that a letter, potentially written by the Zodiac mentioning Riverside activity, was sent to the Los Angeles Times, like, a few years later.
Okay, now that sends chills down my spine. It's like he was deliberately trying to insert himself into the narrative even years later, but even with that letter, the link to Cherry Jo Bates remains, it's debated. What is it about this case that makes it so hard to pin down?
Well, the evidence is sparse,
Mhm.
and there are conflicting details that muddy the waters.
Mhm.
I mean, some aspects of the crime scene, like the brutal nature of the attack, the time of day it occurred, those align with the Zodiac's patterns, but others don't quite fit.
So we're left wondering, was it him? Was it a copycat crime that fueled the speculation? And then there's Donna Lass, the nurse who vanished from Lake Tahoe. That case always struck me as particularly unsettling.
The disappearance of Donna Lass is definitely one of the most perplexing possible connections to the Zodiac case. She went missing in 1970. Now, her body was never found, but a postcard, often called the Peek Through the Pines card, was sent to the San Francisco Chronicle. Many believe it contains clues that point to her being a Zodiac victim.
It's like he was playing this twisted game, leaving these breadcrumbs for investigators, but never revealing the whole picture. And let's not forget about some of the other names that have been thrown into the mix over the years. I mean, Robert Domingos, Linda Edwards, I mean, the list goes on.
Yeah, and what's important to remember here is that each of these potential connections, it just adds another layer of complexity to the case. And while there are these, tantalizing details that suggest a link, none of them have been definitively proven.
It's enough to make your head spin. You start to see the Zodiac everywhere, but without concrete proof, it's all just speculation. Speaking of speculation, let's move on to perhaps the most intriguing aspect of any unsolved mystery, the suspects.
Ah, yes, the suspects. Over the years, there have been countless theories, potential leads, but one name always seems to rise to the top: Arthur Lee Allen.
Arthur Lee Allen, he's the one everyone seems to come back to, even though that hard evidence just didn't pan out. What was it about him that made him such a strong suspect?
Well, there was a laundry list, really, of circumstantial evidence that seemed to point in his direction. He owned a watch with the Zodiac symbol on it, and he even misspelled words in the same way as the Zodiac did in his letters. And to add fuel to the fire, Michael Mageau, the survivor of that Blue Rock Springs attack, actually identified Allen as the man who shot him.
You're kidding. He came face to face with him in a lineup and pointed him out. That's huge. But then the DNA and fingerprint evidence didn't match. What's the deal with that? How can there be so much smoke but no fire?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's the question that has haunted investigators for decades. Some believe that the evidence was mishandled or contaminated, while others think that Allen might have had an accomplice, someone who was actually present at the crime scenes.
That's a chilling thought. So while he can't be definitively ruled out, the lack of physical evidence casts a long shadow over Allen's potential involvement. But he's not the only one who has captured the attention of, investigators and armchair detectives alike. What about the other names that have been thrown around? Earl Van Best Jr., Gary Francis Post, even a group calling themselves the Case Breakers.
Let's unpack those, because they really represent these different avenues this case has gone down. Earl Van Best Jr. enters the picture because his son became convinced enough to write a whole book, that his father was the Zodiac. Family secrets, hidden clues, it's captivating stuff. But again, nothing concrete to definitively link him to the crimes.
So another dead end.
Potentially. Then you have Gary Francis Post, who is named as a suspect by the Case Breakers. This group, and this is important to note, is made up of former law enforcement officers, journalists, military intelligence specialists. They're not your typical armchair detectives, but their claim to cracking the case hinges on circumstantial evidence and photographic analysis that many experts remain skeptical of.
So another intriguing lead, but still no smoking gun.
Exactly. And the Case Breakers also pointed fingers at Richard Gaikowski, a newspaper editor who, interestingly enough, bore a striking resemblance to the composite sketch of the Zodiac.
It's like everyone's trying to piece together this giant puzzle, but the pieces never quite seem to fit. It makes you wonder if we'll ever truly know the identity of the Zodiac Killer.
It's a question that has plagued investigators, amateur sleuths, for decades. It's one that continues to fuel speculation and debate, but even without a definitive answer, the Zodiac's impact on our culture is undeniable.
It's crazy, right? It's like a case from the 60s with coded messages and creepy phone calls, but it still feels relevant today. Like the Zodiac tapped into something dark that we're still fascinated by and kind of scared of, even now.
It really is. The case isn't just about, solving a crime. It's about this idea that some things might just never be solved.
Yeah.
Like how does that hit us?
Yeah.
What does that do to us?
Totally. Like a ghost story that just won't go away.
And speaking of ghost stories, you mentioned how the Zodiac changed our culture. And you can't ignore those armchair detectives, the zodiologists, still obsessed with this case. Why are people so obsessed after all this time?
I think it's the ultimate puzzle. history, cryptic clues, and this idea that someone out there knows. Plus, the internet just explodes with theories. Some people even say they get messages from, well.
Okay, see, now that's creepy. But it shows how powerful this case is. Don't forget the movies. David Fincher's Zodiac is amazing. Oh, that movie's intense. You really feel the fear from back then. And the actor who plays Robert Graysmith, the cartoonist, obsessed with the case. So good.
Exactly. Those personal stories, the obsession, it's more than just a true crime thing.
Mhm.
But with all these theories, suspects, dead ends, will we ever really know who did it? Is there even a tiny chance this gets solved?
That question, it haunts everyone who gets sucked into the Zodiac. It gets harder with time to find new clues, but DNA is getting better. People look at old evidence in new ways. Maybe there's a break.
So there's hope, even a little bit, that the Zodiac gets unmasked.
Hope, yeah. And the unknown is just alluring. Those things keep this case alive. Who knows? Maybe one day we'll get the truth.
We can hope. Well, this has been a lot to process today. The crimes, the suspects, the obsession. It reminds us that there's dark stuff out there, and some questions just don't have answers, at least not yet.
It makes you think about life, death, and what we can really understand, And those are the mysteries that stay with you.
Thanks for this deep dive, everyone. Until next time, keep those brains working, ask questions, and don't be afraid of a little mystery.